Welcome to the deep dive. Just looking back at the summer of 2023, the signs were, well, they were everywhere, weren't they? Record heat waves, those terrible wildfires, catastrophic floods. These weren't just news stories. They felt like vital signs, really loud signals about our planet's health. So today, we're taking a deep dive into a concept that might help us grasp what's happening: metabolic restoration of Earth. It's an idea borrowed from medicine, suggesting we need to help the Earth system get back to healthy function after a major shock, like recovering from an illness.
Exactly. And it's really key, I think, to understand this isn't just a simple metaphor. Earth is a body. It's more a guiding concept. It
Hmm.
helps us focus on the actual mechanisms that are out of whack and, importantly, how they might recover. What this report highlights so well is this dual crisis. You've got the material basis, the actual physical flows of heat and water being disrupted. But then there's the mediatic basis, how information, how understanding about the crisis moves or sometimes gets completely stuck within society.
That's a really interesting split. So the Earth as a patient, those heat waves, the floods, they're like symptoms, critical symptoms. What kind of mindset does that medical analogy give us? What's the first step for a doctor seeing those signs?
Well, the first step is always diagnosis, right? Understand what's causing the symptoms. And then you need a treatment plan. The report sort of casts humanity as the clinical team for the planet. It implies we need, well, precise interventions, a commitment to long-term recovery, and a holistic view. You have to treat the physical and the underlying system issues. So our mission today is really to unpack both sides, the material and the mediatic, figure out how they're broken and what restoration truly means for our planet.
Great, let's dive into that, starting with the physical side. Earth's own metabolism. The report calls water the lifeblood of the climate system. So what does that mean? What's its main job?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. I mean, Earth's climate is basically driven by how heat moves around, and water is the key vehicle for that. Think of the hydrological cycle, the water cycle, as this giant planetary heat engine. When water evaporates, say from the ocean surface, it absorbs a huge amount of heat energy. Not heat you feel directly, it's called latent heat flux. Hidden energy stored in the water vapor. And that process alone, it accounts for something like a quarter of all the energy leaving Earth's surface. Then this vapor travels around the globe. When it condenses into clouds, into rain, it releases that stored heat, warming the air. It's like a massive heat pump, really. Someone described water as the air conditioner of the planet.
Okay, so it moves heat from the hot parts to the colder parts.
Precisely. It helps regulate the whole system.
But what about water vapor itself? I hear it's a greenhouse gas too, maybe even more powerful than co-euro. How does that work?
That's absolutely correct. Water vapor is a very powerful greenhouse gas. It's responsible for maybe 50% of the natural greenhouse effect. Co-euro is closer to, say, 19%. But here's the crucial bit. Water vapor is a feedback. It's not the primary driver. How much water vapor is in the air depends almost entirely on the temperature. Warmer air just holds more moisture. It's a physical law, the Clausius-Clapeyron relation. About 7% more water vapor for every degree Celsius warmer it gets.
Okay, so co-euro is like the thermostat knob. It sets the basic temperature.
Exactly. Co-euro is at the control knob.
And then, as co-euros warms things up, more water evaporates, and that extra water vapor traps even more heat. It amplifies it.
You've got it. COAST gives the initial push. The atmosphere warms, holds more water vapor, and that water vapor doubles down on the warming. It's a really powerful, amplifying feedback. Makes the whole system very sensitive to changes in co-ro. And this isn't just a local thing. It links up to the big planetary systems. That heat released in the tropics. It helps drive huge atmospheric circulation patterns, like the Hadley cells. And in the oceans, evaporation and rainfall change salinity, which affects water density, which is key for the thermohaline circulation, including the AMOC, that big Atlantic current carrying heat up towards Europe.
Right, the ocean conveyor.
That's the one. And there's another feedback, too, the ice albedo effect. As ice melts, you expose darker land or ocean. Dark surfaces absorb more sunlight instead of reflecting it like ice does. So more absorption means more warming, which means more melting. You see the loop. That's a big reason for polar amplification, why the Arctic is warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the planet. So the bottom line is Earth's climate depends on this dynamic balance of heat and water. It has this sort of homeostasis. But the report warns if you push it too hard, like we are, you risk runaway warming and just extreme variability. The system becomes, well, overheated and dysregulated.
Overheated and dysregulated. That sounds pretty serious for our planetary patient. So how did human activities manage to throw such a big wrench into this finely tuned system?
Well, the biggest single disruption is the massive increase in radiative forcing from greenhouse gases. KO, methane, nitrous oxide. all trapping extra heat. And that extra heat, it basically supercharges the whole global water cycle. It leads to what the IPCC is now highly confident about. More intense rain and floods in some places, and deeper, longer droughts in others. You often hear it called the wet gets wetter, dry gets drier pattern.
And that translates directly into, well, more extreme weather in our lives, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because warmer air holds exponentially more moisture, remember, that's 7% per degree. It means each little bit of warming can disproportionately ramp up the intensity of extreme rain. These rain bombs people talk about. We're also seeing more compound extremes, things happening together, heat and drought and fire all feeding off each other. Summer 2023 was just a brutal example.
Yeah.
Record heat driving those huge Canadian wildfires, but also record rainfall causing awful floods in Libya, Vermont.
It felt relentless.
It did. And we're also seeing major shifting precipitation patterns. A really worrying example is the Amazon. Deforestation there is critical. If we lose maybe 40% of the forest, scientists think it could trigger a feedback loop. Less forest means less moisture recycling back into the air, which means less rain, which the forest needs. It could tip over into a much drier savanna state. That's a huge potential tipping point. Urban areas also change things locally, of course. Rainfall patterns, heat islands, and then you have the cryosphere and ocean impacts. Melting glaciers, melting ice sheets, they pour fresh water into the oceans. In the North Atlantic, that fresh water is less dense. It can sit on the surface and potentially slow down that AMC circulation we mentioned.
One bringing heat to Europe.
Exactly. Now, there's still some debate on exactly how much it's weakening versus just natural variation, but the risk is definitely there. A potential tipping point that could drastically cool parts of Northern Europe and just mess up global heat transport.
Wow. It really does sound like we're running this massive, uncontrolled experiment on the only planet we have.
Yeah, that's a very apt way to put it. We're pushing the system towards potential feedback cascades and tipping points. These are nonlinear shifts. You push gradually, and then suddenly things can flip, sometimes irreversibly. Think about the Amazon dieback possibility, or coral reefs collapsing from heat and acidity, or permafrost thawing and releasing huge amounts of methane in Coyero. Human forcing, our actions, are basically risking pushing parts of the Earth system into a completely new state, a new regime that could be, as the report says, far less hospitable.
Okay, so that's the diagnosis. Pretty grim. How do we move to treatment? What does metabolic restoration actually look like in terms of action? How do we help restore a more stable state?
Right. The absolute non-negotiable first step, according to the report, is deep emissions reductions. Mitigation. It's like stopping the flow of a toxin into the patient. You have to stop poisoning the system. The IPCC is crystal clear on this. Stabilizing the climate needs strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, getting to net zero 2 euros. And we need to remember the lag time. Even if we hit net zero tomorrow, temperatures would likely keep rising for another 20, 30 years because of the heat already stored, mostly in the oceans, so urgency is critical.
Just stopping isn't enough then. To really restore things, do we need to pull carbon out of the air?
That's the next big question. And yes, to get back towards a safer state, maybe closer to pre-industrial conditions, just stopping emissions probably isn't enough. We likely need carbon dioxide removal, CDR, actively taking Coyero out of the atmosphere. This includes everything from planting trees, afforestation, to high-tech stuff like direct air capture machines. You could think of it like planetary dialysis, filtering out the excess CO. The huge challenge, though, is doing this at a scale that makes a real difference. It's incredibly difficult and expensive right now.
Okay, so stopping emissions, maybe removing some Kiro, what else?
Land use and ecosystem restoration. This is often a win-win. Healthy ecosystems are just vital for Earth's metabolism. Forests recycle moisture, cool surfaces. Wetlands regulate water flow. Stopping deforestation, especially in places like the Amazon, isn't just about carbon. It's about preserving those vital functions, preventing those dieback tipping points, restoring wetlands, peatlands. They're crucial for water cycles and resilience. And alongside those big strategies, we need water management and climate adaptation. This is like supporting the patient while they recover, giving them hydration, cooling packs. It means building better infrastructure, smarter water use in farming, flood defenses, early warning systems for storms and heat waves. These things don't fix the global climate directly, but they make communities and ecosystems much more resilient to the changes already happening.
What about the more, let's say, radical ideas? Geoengineering. The report mentions solar radiation management, SRM.
Yes, SRM geoengineering. The idea is to artificially cool the planet by reflecting sunlight back into space, maybe injecting aerosols high up in the stratosphere.
Yeah.
Well, it's highly controversial for very good reasons. First, it doesn't fix the root cause, the COO. Ocean acidification would continue, for example, and the model suggests SRM could seriously mess with weather patterns, potentially weakening monsoons that millions rely on in Asia and Africa.
Wow.
Plus, there's the termination shock. If you started SRM and then had to stop suddenly for some reason, maybe a war or an economic collapse, temperatures would shoot up incredibly fast, much faster than the warming we're experiencing now. So the report is pretty cautious. It advises focusing on no-regret options, things like renewables, efficiency, ecosystem restoration that have clear benefits anyway. SRM is seen as very high risk, maybe a last resort, if ever.
It sounds like you really need to weave these strategies together. The report gives an example, right? A semi-arid region facing drought, but also floods. How would it work there?
Yeah, that's a great illustration of integration. In a place like that, you'd maybe swap diesel for solar power, cuts emissions locally, you'd reforest the hills upstream, helps hold soil, maybe encourages a bit more local rain, slows runoff. You'd restore wetlands downstream that can soak up floodwater, release it slowly, recharge groundwater. Then you'd work on farming, rainwater harvesting, super efficient irrigation. And you'd need better weather forecasts, heat warnings, cooling centers. But, and this is crucial, the report stresses justice and feasibility. Who benefits? Who pays? Are local communities, especially indigenous groups with deep knowledge of the land, involved in designing solutions? You can't just impose technical fixes.
So summing up the material restoration part,
Yeah.
what are the main goals?
Okay, so first, stop the bleeding. Cut those emissions drastically. Second, support the healing, enhance the natural systems, the forests, the wetlands that help regulate everything. Third, avoid harmful medications. Be super cautious about things like SRM with big unknown risks. And all along, monitor the vital signs. Keep improving our observations and understanding. The overall aim is to help the Earth system find a new healthy balance, a new healthy homeostasis, even if it's not exactly like the past.
Okay, that covers the physical side, the material crisis. But the report argues the harder part might be mobilizing us, human societies. Why has action been so slow despite scientists warning us for decades? It seems like it's deeply cultural, even psychological.
It really is. And this is where the report introduces that idea of the mediatic metabolism, how society processes information, specifically about climate change. And it brings in a pretty challenging psychoanalytic concept. Enjoyment, or jouissance. The argument is that how we react or fail to react isn't always rational. It's often driven by deeper emotional currents, by forms of satisfaction, jouissance that can be irrational, even self-destructive. Certain narratives or stances stick around not because they're true, but because they offer some kind of underlying enjoyment.
Enjoyment. That sounds counterintuitive when talking about a crisis. How does that relate to the way attention seems to ebb and flow, that issue attention cycle you mentioned?
It connects directly. That cycle, panic, then boredom, then maybe panic again, is driven by a few things. Media business models often favor novelty, the latest shock. Climate change is a slow burn, mostly. Then there's just emotional fatigue. People get overwhelmed. Climate fatigue, eco-anxiety. It's real. People tune out to cope. And climate change is always competing with the next big thing. Wars, recessions, pandemics. Social media just throws gasoline on that fire. Algorithms often push emotionally charged stuff, outrage. It makes sustained, thoughtful engagement really hard.
So some people tune out. But what about those who actively deny it's happening? Where does enjoyment fit in there?
This is where it gets really interesting and kind of disturbing. The report suggests denial can offer an easy form of enjoyment. It's the pleasure of simply not having to care, not having to change, not feeling guilty. It ties into ideas like Uzik's disavowed knowledge. We sort of know it's real, but we act like it isn't. Or Kari Norgaard's strategic ignorance. We collectively look away. And you see more active forms of this enjoyment, too. Think about climate trolls online. They get a thrill from provoking people, from transgression. Or consider petromasculinity and that practice of rolling coal, modifying trucks to spew black smoke, often deliberately at cyclists or electric cars. The analysis suggests the enjoyment there isn't despite harming the environment, it's because of it. It's a kind of aggressive, sadistic pleasure in sticking it to perceived enemies, like environmentalists, shouting things like, "Make America great again," while doing it. It's enjoyment tied to identity and antagonism. And then there are conspiracy theories, like ClimateGate. They offer a different kind of enjoyment, the thrill of feeling you have secret knowledge, that you're seeing through the lies. It simplifies a complex world into a drama of good versus evil. It's emotionally compelling, even if it's totally wrong.
It's really unsettling to frame denial that way. But what about the opposite end, the people who seem almost fixated on doom? Is there an apocalyptic enjoyment there, too?
There absolutely can be, yes. apocalyptic enjoyment, or doom scrolling. Now, obviously, a lot of that comes from genuine fear and grief, but it can also become a kind of performance, a sort of fatalistic relish in how bad things are. Paradoxically, constantly focusing on the catastrophe can make action feel pointless. If it's all doomed anyway, why bother? Someone called Gabriel Bentley wrote about climate politics becoming a spectacle. He argues a lot of the conflict is based on this idea that the other side of the debate is somehow stealing or ruining your enjoyment, your way of life.
Right.
This breeds cynicism and stops people engaging constructively.
Okay, so if our information metabolism is disordered, tangled up with these difficult emotions and weird forms of enjoyment, how do we even begin to heal that?
It needs a similar multi-pronged approach as the physical side. You start with debunking myths. It's necessary groundwork. But you have to do it carefully. Best practice is focus on the facts, keep it simple, explain the logical fallacy the myth uses, and this is key, fill the gap with the correct information. Otherwise, you risk the backfire effect, where challenging the myth actually makes people believe it more strongly.
Right, but debunking is always reactive. How do you get ahead? The report mentioned inoculation, like a vaccine.
Exactly.
Hi.
Inoculation or pre-bunking is about building mental immunity. You expose people to weakened versions of misleading arguments before they encounter the real thing, and you explain the manipulative techniques being used. There was a key study back in 2017 showing this works. They told people about the 97% scientific consensus on climate change, but also warned them that some groups use fake experts to manufacture doubt. That warning helped people resist misinformation later. And gamification is proving really effective here too. Games like Bad News or Cranky Uncle actually let you play the role of someone spreading misinformation.
Ah,
Yeah. By learning the tricks yourself, in a fun way, you become much better at spotting them in the wild. It builds resilience, often using humor, which makes it stick. Beyond just fighting falsehoods, we desperately need alternative narratives and framing. We need to shift from talking about sacrifice to talking about opportunity, building a cleaner, healthier, more innovative future. Highlighting health co-benefits is really powerful. Cleaner air from less fossil fuels means fewer kids with asthma. That's a win-win, people understand. We also need to make stories local and human, connect climate impacts and solutions to people's actual lives, and find trusted messengers. It's not always scientists people listen to. It might be faith leaders, military figures, local farmers, even former fossil fuel workers talking about transitioning to renewables. They can reach different audiences.
that point about trusted messengers seems so important. But back to that tricky enjoyment idea. Can we counter the enjoyment of denial by making climate action enjoyable?
Yes, I think we have to try. We need to think about effective resonance and reframing enjoyment. Make climate action feel good, rewarding, social. Think community solar projects, citywide challenges, tree planting festivals. Look at youth movements like Fridays for Future. Part of their power is the sense of camaraderie, of being part of something cool and important. It's shifted the culture for a lot of young people. We can also reframe existing pleasures. Maybe the thrill isn't a roaring V8, but the instant silent torque of an electric car. Maybe plant-based food isn't about deprivation, but about amazing new tastes and culinary creativity. And tapping into pride and patriotism, framing climate leadership as a way for a country to innovate and lead the world, that can be very powerful too. Then there are structural things, policy and platform changes. Social media needs to handle misinformation, better tweaking algorithms, using context labels. We need robust public media, transparency in climate data, and education is key. Media literacy, critical thinking skills from a young age. Finally, things like community dialogue, citizens' assemblies can be incredibly powerful. When people sit down together, listen respectfully, grapple with the issues directly, even skeptics often come around to supporting action. It bypasses the political spectacle. The goal here is to essentially disempower the merchants of doubt and empower the public with resilient understanding. Restore that healthy information flow.
So we have these two systems: Earth's physical metabolism, society's mediatic metabolism. And the report really stresses they aren't separate problems, they're totally tangled up.
Absolutely. They feed back on each other constantly. Climate disasters, for example, they can grab attention, increase concern, but they can also cause despair or trigger backlash if the response feels unfair. Think about the pandemic. Lockdowns dramatically cut emissions. That was a social change causing a physical one. Then society changed again. Emissions bounced back. It showed how quickly things can change, though. That Amazon rainforest tipping point is a perfect example of the entanglement. The physical fate of the forest, whether it tips into savanna, depends directly on human decisions. Government policies on logging, global demand for beef and soy, recognizing indigenous land rights. We saw in Brazil how a change in government led to a rapid drop in deforestation rates, a social political shift directly impacting the planet's physical metabolism. It shows how Earth system tipping points are often linked to potential social tipping points.
Right, the report mentions social tipping points. What are those exactly?
They're similar to physical ones' rapid, nonlinear shifts, but in society, in norms, behaviors, technologies. Think about how quickly smartphones took over, or maybe how electric vehicles might reach a point where adoption suddenly accelerates. Youth activism could be another example, shifting the political landscape quickly. These social shifts can potentially help us hit climate targets much faster than purely incremental change. The report argues that humanity needs to become, in a sense, the regenerative consciousness of the planet. We have to intentionally restore balance, not just react passively. And that requires this multi-level restoration approach, working on all fronts at once. There's the technical level, renewables, efficiency, conservation tech, but needing careful assessment like impacts of mining for batteries. Then the policy level, laws, carbon pricing, international cooperation like the Paris Agreement, ensuring fairness. Then the cultural level, shifting norms so sustainable living is just normal. Better storytelling, education, the interpersonal level, community action, citizen science projects, rebuilding trust and connection locally. And finally, the ethical spiritual level, fundamentally rethinking our relationship with nature, ideas of stewardship, interdependence, maybe even rights of nature.
That's a really holistic view. Does the report acknowledge how complex and uncertain all this is?
Oh, absolutely. Embracing complexity and uncertainty is key. There's no single magic bullet. Solutions have to be tailored to local context. We need to be ready for unintended consequences. Remember the Gilets jaunes protests in France over fuel taxes? That showed how crucial social justice is. If climate policies feel unfair, people will push back hard. It requires what the report calls epistemic humility. We don't have all the answers. We need systems that can learn, adapt, and be robust, even when we're not totally sure what's coming next.
So we've taken this deep dive into metabolic restoration. We've looked at Earth's physical systems, how we've disrupted them, and this really complex interplay of science, culture, psychology, emotion, and how we respond.
And it's worth reiterating a key point from the report. We have to be wary of simplistic fixes. No technocratic silver bullets, no greenwashing that looks good but doesn't change much. Equity and responsibility have to be central. The burden can't fall unfairly on the poor or vulnerable. And while we need urgency, the report strongly cautions against any slide towards authoritarian ecofascism. It stresses that democracies, messy as they are capable of delivering the just and sustained action needed. It's about maintaining urgency without despair. We do that by focusing on progress where it happens and holding on to a kind of conditional optimism, believing that if we act decisively and together, a better future is still possible.
So for you listening, what does this all mean? The report kind of positions us, this generation, as the clinical team for Earth. What would the vital signs of success look like? How would we know this metabolic restoration is actually working?
Well, the signs would be clear and profound. We'd see global greenhouse gas emissions falling sharply, heading towards net zero. We'd see COO's levels in the atmosphere finally plateaued and then slowly start to decline. We'd see the rate of global temperature increase halt, the planet's energy budget coming back into balance. Ecosystems would start showing signs of recovery, maybe coral reefs adapting, forests stabilizing, Arctic sea ice loss slowing down. And in human terms, cleaner air, cities designed for resilience and well-being, sustained international cooperation. It wouldn't be a single moment of cure, but an ongoing commitment, a shift to actively maintaining balance and adaptiveness.
You know, the climate crisis,
Mm-hmm.
for all the destruction and fear, and it's also a messenger, isn't it? It's telling us loud and clear that the way we've been powering our world, organizing our societies, it's just unsustainable. It's pushed our planetary patient to the brink. So the question for you is, what kind of relationship will you choose to build with the planet and with each other to help move us towards this profound, necessary metabolic restoration? Our Earth and really ourselves, we're depending on the answer.